Well, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome our next keynote number 5 address in the convention. I don't think Douglas needs much introduction because everyone knows him and he's been up on the stage yesterday anyway. However, he is a 5 times winner of the Toastmasters Southern African Championships for Public Speaking. He is a full-time professional speaker who broke the R1 million earnings barrier for the first time last year. And his first book on public speaking was published by Human and Rousseau, and his latest book on the topic of expert positioning will be published by Penguin at the end of the year. So he's been published in a number of magazines like Entrepreneur, Sales Guru, and Forbes. And today Douglas will be speaking on how to grow your business by becoming iconic rather than generic as a speaker. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a big round of applause and welcome for Mr. Douglas Kruger.
Expert or amateur, iconic or generic. Folks, it's an absolute pleasure to be speaking for a group of my peers here today, and that is the idea that I would like to explore with you. We're seated in a room full of very competent, very able speakers, and there are a great number of us around the world, professional speakers who are solidly good at what we do. But how do we go beyond simply being good and become iconic? Now, why would you want to be iconic? Well, one of our leading speakers overseas in the NSA, Randy Gage, says, if you are a commodity, in other words, if you're like everyone else, they will shop you based on price. However, if you are the icon, they will build the event around you. Now that's the kind of thing that we want to do, what we want to achieve. Joe Calloway calls it becoming a category of one. You are the only logical choice because you're the icon when it comes to that particular sphere. Now, I come from a background where my family raised me in a family business, and our tone was solidly amateur rather than expert. In other words, we got a lot of it wrong. I love my folks very dearly. My mom and dad are great people and are incredibly good parents and did many things right. But what they did not excel at was how to run a business. And I grew up as kind of the poor cousin in my relatively well-off area. I grew up in Veltevreden Park. And when you're in sort of primary school and high school level, you can always tell who the kids are who come from the families that are struggling just a little. Your first clue is the car in which they're picked up after school. Ours would always arrive and break down promptly on the pavement outside of the school. We called it Puff the Magic Peugeot. You can also tell there are more visual cues, which are, for example, the uniforms. The poor cousin of the school will be wearing the uniform that is either way too big, because it has to last for the next 3 years, or way too small, because it just did so. Now, when you have a family scenario like that, you've got to find ways in which to entertain yourself and ways to entertain the kids. And I suspect the search for entertainment is why myself and my sister exist in the first place. But once you've had the kids, you've got to find ways to entertain them. And my dad was very conscious of the idea that he couldn't provide things like the latest Nintendo sets and whatever the other kids were playing with. So he walked out into our backyard and took a look at what we had to work with. And we just happened to have this enormous tree hanging over our wall from the neighbor's side. And there was a branch probably about 30 feet up, maybe about as high as the roof in this building. My dad had a brainwave. He decided to take a small rock and put it into a sack. And he tied the sack shut with the end of a rope. Then what he did was he went out and stood directly beneath this branch and tried to hurl the rock over the branch to make a rope swing. Of course, he stood directly beneath the branch, but once he regained consciousness, he created a rope swing that became legendary among my friends at school. And it was very different to what most of us think of when we think of a rope swing. You know, when you think of a backyard rope swing, we tend to think of an old peach tree and perhaps half a meter of chain and usually an old car tire. And the kids spend a couple of days swinging backwards and forwards in a 1 meter arc, and then they lose interest. Ours was nothing like that. For starters, you actually held on to handlebars at the bottom of this rope. You didn't sit on it. And then what you did was you ran across the yard until the rope took. And when the rope took, with your feet out, you would swing out over the roof of the house on this side. And then he would come back and run across the yard and swing over the telephone wires on that side. And we had surprisingly few fatalities. And most of them were kids that nobody really missed anyway. One afternoon, my best friend finds me at school, and I'm about 12 years old, my little sister is 6 months old, and he says, "Doug, I've asked for my mom's permission. She said yes. Can I come around and play on the rope swing?" And I can't remember the excuse that I gave, but I said no. Now, while I can't remember the excuse, I can remember the reason I had to give it. I knew that afternoon our church was delivering a food basket to our family. And as a 12-year-old boy, I didn't want my best friend to know. Now, the one thing that sticks out in my mind to this day, and it's possibly the thing that pushes me to do what I do as a speaker and to make more of my life, was that every time these church food baskets arrived, they would always include a small box of baby formula. And I can remember being 12 years old and looking at this little box of baby formula and thinking, that is not what I want for my life. And it's a weird mix of emotions. Because on the one hand, you're incredibly grateful that someone is helping your family. And on the other hand, you are incredibly embarrassed that they have to. Now, I don't tell the story for any kind of pity. The lesson behind it, and it's taken me 20 years to unravel this kind of thinking, is if you continually and consistently practice business as an amateur, eventually, over the passage of time, you will develop a scenario in which your church is delivering food baskets to feed your family. But if you become iconic in your business sphere, it changes your reality. And it changes things dramatically for us. As speakers, we live a life in which we play a game of perceptions. We get to market ourselves at whatever level we choose, and it's a wonderful thing, but we have to understand how to work with and manipulate those perceptions in order to raise our own positioning. And I think we make a couple of mistakes as we do that. We tend to think that qualification is everything. And we also tend to think that content is everything. And while those two things are massively important, I think we're missing something down the line here. They don't make us iconic in and of themselves. I recently had a chance to have a little case study of how speakers can stand out. What happened was, it was literally a couple of weeks ago, a lady who was the head of her division at one of the large firms in Santon was up against a challenge. She didn't enjoy speaking in public. She found it absolutely traumatizing. But she had been selected as one of 50 individuals that they were looking at for their CEO program. And the scenario was this. They were going to take all 50 people into the room, one by one, in sausage factory style, and each one had to do a 5-minute presentation to justify why they should be chosen for the leadership fast track. There was a lot of money at play here. If you were selected as one of their, I think it was 8 or 10 people in total, they would invest R500,000 sending you overseas. You'd spend time at Oxford in one of their academies, and of course it would change your career trajectory in that you are now on their leadership fast track program. And when I met with her to talk about her 5-minute presentation, she spoke about how qualified her competitors were. How she was up against people who had PhDs and had been at the company longer than what she had and whose sales figures were astronomical. And in the course of our discussion, I basically said to her that, if it came down to the numbers alone, or if it came down to the qualification alone, you would be in or out already. What was going on there was that they were looking for a specific type of person. Now that's a great advantage for a speaker. So we sat and thought about the psychology behind this presentation of hers. And when she had the chance to speak, we decided to do something dramatically different to what we perceived all the other people would do. Now, most of her competitors were actuaries and very technical people. So what we did was, as presenter number 38, we had her walk into the room and change the thinking completely. Rather than talk about her qualifications, her expertise, or her past, rather than throw out all the corporate jargon and the buzzwords and the expected phrases like, I'm ready for new challenges, I can't wait to move up the ladder, I want to invest in my people, all the obvious things that they've heard 38 times already, we equipped her with a single metaphor. She walked into the room and she said, I'd like to take you on a mental journey. Picture yourself standing outside on West Street, on the far side, and looking at our buildings for the first time. What do you see? What do you imagine when you see a corporate building like that. Most of us have perceptions of infighting and cubicle versus cubicle, fiefdom against fiefdom, and it's kill or be killed, hunt or be hunted. And she then went on to say, I don't see it that way. When I walk through the doors, I see something different. I see only one thing inside, and that is an escalator that rises from the bottom to the top. It carries our people as they grow and develop their skills from the lower levels to the higher ones. Now, the best people perceive that if you move up slightly on this escalator, you need to pull your people up with you. Otherwise, you cause a tear in the corporate structure. And that was her simple metaphor, and it was the only thing she said in her presentation. And she won and was selected and is going through to Oxford as a result of that. Now, the key learning there is that it's not about the qualifications. It's not about the numbers. It's not about necessarily just the content and the dots and dashes of information we have at our disposal. We are something more than school teachers. We are something a little bit sexier than professors. I always see it this way. When you position yourself as an expert, you've got two things working in opposition to each other. The one is personality, and the other is knowledge. If we have all the knowledge in the world, but no personality, we're simply specialists. We're not experts. If we have all the personality in the world, but no knowledge, we are Kardashians. We need a meeting between these two. And it's by bringing across that personality that we actually position ourselves as experts and become iconic. Think about the number of motoring shows that we have around the world. There must be thousands. So why Jeremy Clarkson? Think about the number of people on this planet who know how to cook to a lesser or greater degree. So why Jamie Oliver? Why Nigella Lawson? Are they the world's most proficient cooks? Do you think? No? I don't think we would even put them in the top 10. Perhaps not even in the top 100 or the top 1,000. There is something else that these people are doing in order to stand out. Now, I've been thinking about this idea for a number of years now. What is it that goes into creating an expert, creating an icon? How do you get your name? At the end of the sentence, you know who you should talk to about that. How do you become the logical name that springs to people's minds? And while I was thinking about this last year, I had the chance to go through to our NSA convention in Dallas, Texas. And I had some interesting perceptions about the speakers who attended that year. And I'm going to have to be very honest with you and actually and express this one fairly carefully. Most of the speakers there were someone's nice uncle or someone's nice auntie, except for one or two who stood out as the shining light icons. Now, in this particular case, the ones that sprang to mind for me is, on the male side of things, we had a speaker named Randy Gage, and he was really incredible. We had a lady presenting there named Lisa Sasevich, and both of them did things that were fairly similar in their own way, but made them stand out from the group. They were so much more than the content they presented. They were these strong, iconic personalities who did things differently. So, in the same way that the lady that I worked with was trying to be one person standing out from a crowd of 50, if we are already competent speakers, we're simply part of that crowd. How do we stand out and become iconic? Well, I'd like to share a number of ideas with you today that can help us toward those ends. And some of them are fairly abstract, and some of them are very concrete, simple, practical things that you can actually do. And the first one is, you've got to have big game mentality. Big game mentality. There's a wise Austrian philosopher, Arnold Schwarzenegger. In fact, what are some of Arnold's catchphrases? What are his best known ones? I'll be back. Yes. Hasta la vista, baby. Come with me if you want to live. Yes. Or more recently, vote for me if you want to live. Or if you follow the tabloids, it's help me to pay alimony if you want to live. But Arnold Schwarzenegger, it really is a study in how you position yourself as something iconic in 3 different industries. And he really is something very special. You know, there are 2 men who have won the Mr. Olympia contest, which is the highest honor in bodybuilding, 8 separate times. Schwarzenegger did it 7 times. But any audience that you ask anywhere in the world, what's the first name that springs to mind when you say bodybuilding? It's Arnold Schwarzenegger. He is not the most accomplished bodybuilder, but he is the most iconic name. Now, Schwarzenegger had an interesting approach to his own sense of performance. Talk about big game temperament. When most of us look at our idols and our icons and our heroes and the people we want to emulate, we ask ourselves, how can I be like her? How can I be like him? Schwarzenegger did something subtly different. He moved from Austria to California in order to study the best in the world so that he could work out how to exceed them. That was his stated goal. That was his intention. That was his thinking when he first set out in his early 20s. Talk about big match temperament. Who's your current hero? Who's your current speaking idol? Are you trying to be as good? Because perhaps that thinking is not good enough. Maybe we need to try to be better. John Bon Jovi, and for our American visitors, Bon Jovi are coming out to the country. They've been my favorite band since I was 8 years old. I absolutely love them. John Bon Jovi summed this one up beautifully, and I'll sanitize his language slightly. I actually quote him at the beginning of my expert positioning book. He says, "I don't think it's good enough for a kid to want to be the backup to Mick Jagger. You've got to want to be Mick frickin' Jagger." And that's the way he puts it. And really, let's put aside all of the marketing and all of the business for a second and ask a basic question: do you yearn enough? Do you walk out at night and look at the stars and say, I want more for my life? Do you want to be something more? And I really think that is our starting point. That's the first thing. Do you have that big match temperament? The next one is, as we position ourselves as iconic speakers, we need to speak strong. Simple as that. Speak strong. But those simple words imply a great many things. The first one, and I think this is an idea that we all need to take to heart, is that great speakers have a strong point of view. Or more simply put, they are very opinionated. You know, don't you just sometimes wish that Steph would give more of his opinions at these meetings? We never know how he feels about a thing. The best speakers are not just there reporting and disseminating information. They have a strong point of view. Now, when you have a strong point of view, it changes you from the teacher, the professor, to the thought leader, because it goes from the dots and dashes of information to how to think about this, what to do about this, what to become as a result. And it's very counterintuitive because we want to be safe on a stage. We want to say the nice things. And in fact, at the Dallas convention, Randy Gage said, if you speak safe, it will take you to here. But if you have a strong point of view, it will take you to here. Maybe that's what Jeremy Clarkson is doing on Top Gear. He's arguably the world's most opinionated man. And he is also a legend in the motoring industry. Have you noticed how things like the other TV shows about cars, the other magazines about cars, are now starting to emulate his style? They're bringing in the humor, the metaphors, the personality. He was the first person to do it, and for that reason, he's iconic. So the first idea around speaking strong is having a strong point of view. The next one is ditching peripheral speak. What is peripheral speak? You've seen a speaker in the last few weeks, last few months, walk up onto a stage and say something like, before I begin, you've begun. If you're standing on a stage speaking to an audience, I've got news for you, you have already started. You can't say before I begin. And peripheral speak, it's all the stuff around the edges of a good presentation, and it tends to soften. It's things like the apologies, it's things like the justifications and the explanations. People who speak strong get up, say their thing, and sit back down again. And it's quite challenging, because once again, we want to be polite. We want to speak in euphemisms. We want to soften the things that we say, and it's actually quite difficult to speak with a certain pow. Brian Walters, the guy who hosted VOE last year, uses the term going verbally viral. I think that's just such a lovely phrase. Now, you don't go verbally viral when you speak in long, apologetic, euphemistic, waffling sentences. You go verbally viral when you speak in short, pow sentences, things that really hit home, that are short, sharp, and concentrated. We actually need to think in ways that are just a little bit more spectacular. We have the advantage as speakers that we are trained to be high-impact communicators. And the opposite of that is interesting as a case study. Most corporate folks are low-impact communicators. When they stand up to do a presentation, it's generally turn your back on the audience and point to the first slide and the first bullet point. And I will start on the left-hand side, and I will end on slide number 3 at the bottom on the right. Now, as speakers, we know that we can be much more powerful if we talk in stories and metaphors and humor and things that make ideas come alive. But it's worth repeating the idea that we need to speak strong and find ways to make our ideas come alive and have that impact for other people. Speak strong is the second idea. The third one, and this one is a little bit abstract, and I hope it will make sense. Great iconic speakers practice extra scenario thinking. We practice extra scenario thinking. So what does that mean? Well, let's take this one from the point of view of one person who's potentially sitting in one of our audiences. Let's say that it's a guy who's grown up in a relatively poor neighborhood. And what he has done is he has tuned into what's happening around him. How can he use and manipulate his scenarios and his world in order to try to get ahead? The person who is really observant will see how the systems work and can become very good within those systems. Our job as speakers is to take that person beyond his own system and say, what's over the next horizon? Does that make sense? We have to be the dreamers for our audiences. We can't just tell them how to be good within their small scenario. We need to be the ones who are saying, but wait, there's more. What else is there above and beyond your scenario? I get stuck in my own scenario thinking from time to time because, like many of you, I work from home. I'm not often surrounded by people when I'm not out actually speaking at a gig. And sometimes your thinking can become quite small, quite contained, quite stagnant. And it's as though you're sitting in your chair looking at a limited number of levers that you can move and operate in order to manipulate the world around you. From time to time, we need to get right up out of that seat and go somewhere else and look at what other levers are available. So extra scenario thinkers are not just looking at what can be done well within the scenario, they're saying what else is there in entirety. And that's why these conventions are so useful to us. But we've got to be that to our audiences. Take them on these imaginary journeys. And it also means that when we present, we move them from where they are in the room onto mental journeys or into mental journeys. Take them far away, get them thinking, and get them dreaming. It's a wonderful opportunity to tell stories and use metaphors that are not part of their world. And again, it's one of the advantages for us as speakers. We don't necessarily have to understand the nuts and bolts of every audience and every industry for which we speak. We actually need to be seeing bigger pictures, taking an idea from one sphere and applying it to another. In Scientific American Mind, they actually say that that is one of the types of thinking inherent to geniuses. They see an idea in one thing and apply it to something else. That's what we do for people if we are iconic. We take an idea from something that is not part of their universe, we bring it to them, and we make it come alive for them. That's number 3. Number 4, one of my favorite things, is iconic speakers own a framework. Iconic speakers own a framework. What is a framework? Well, it's quite simply your own unique and novel way of representing your information. It's as simple as that. But it also presents us with an incredible opportunity. A couple of frameworks that we know very well. Off the top of my head, things like Blink, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a great example of a framework because essentially it's addressing the world of finances, personal finance. But rather than call the book or the speech or the training Personal Finances, which is generic, he's made it iconic by calling it Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it also organizes and assembles his information for him. Can you think of a person who is presented at this conference who has a very, very well-known framework throughout South Africa? Clem Sunter. What's the framework? Yes, and he uses as his framework. Scenario planning is the subject. It's like saying financial planning, okay? So what is his framework? Foxes and hedgehogs. Absolutely, there it is. Foxes and hedgehogs, that is his framework. Another example, one of my less businessy talks, my more sort of human motivational ones, is on taking accountability for your own life. But what a boring thing to say. So I've called it the Big Bum Theory. And the Big Bum Theory basically asks, do you own the bum or do you blame the genes? And that's the metaphor, that's the framework, that's the structure around which I present my information. So the question becomes, the thing that you present on, the different ideas that you have you packaged them in something that is memorable and novel enough to become iconic? And it's amazing how a framework can actually help you to access a market. Does anyone watch Travel Channel? DSTV? Travel Channel fans. I often leave Travel Channel on in the background because the visuals are pretty and it's the least intrusive thing while I'm working on articles and so on. There was a show a little while ago, I think it's gone off, called Skinny Dip. Has anyone seen the show Skinny Dip? Yes. Dolph, do you record the show Skinny Dip? No, you just incidental. That's Dolph's story and he's sticking to it. Skinny Dip has exactly the format that the name suggests. What happens is 3 pretty young ladies go on an adventure somewhere in the world and they find a watering hole and they go skinny dip in it with some of the locals. That's the whole show. Now there's nothing terribly naughty about it, it's a little bit risque, but realistically the last 30 seconds of this half-hour show them taking off their gear and you'll see maybe a bit of leg and a bit of naughty cheek and in they go and end credits. But of course they've held you for the entire 30 minutes to get there. Now you have to think to yourself, what a genius framework. Because these were 3 young ladies who had no travel experience. They do not have degrees in travel. They had nothing particularly new to offer to the travel industry. They were not well studied in it. They did not have the most information in it. I can imagine how this meeting went. I can see the 3 of them sitting around going, we want our own TV show. What do we do? Well, we want to go travel. Yeah, how do you get onto a travel show? And one of them going, you know what we should do? We should just take our clothes off and go skinny dip somewhere. And then they all probably laughed, and then the laughter settled down, and one of them went, you know what? That's not a bad idea. And that framework alone was strong enough to help them sell a show into an internationally syndicated channel. Just the strength of the framework. Sometimes the framework can even outstrip the individual. I think about the example of, say, a book about nice stories that make you feel good. Chicken Soup for the Soul. What a beautiful framework, and how iconic it has become just because of the way in which it is phrased. So rather than do the sales seminar, can you do something a little bit different? We have Paul Naidu in this country who does How to Sell Like an Indian. It's a loose framework, but it's a framework. It's something specific, novel, and iconic. What's your framework? What could you do if you were a little creative with it? Number 5, experts are constant producers. Experts are always putting things out there into the world. We've spent a great deal of time at this conference talking about the importance of writing books, of blogging, of tweeting, of creating interesting visuals and videos and so on and so forth. And while I don't want to spend a lot of time saying what you should produce, I do want to emphasize that you should produce. I like the idea of us having our mental factory lights constantly blazing. We are constantly putting out information and knowledge and ideas and visuals out into the universe. James Michener, who was an author of historical fiction last century, used to write on average 7,000 to 8,000 words per day. And there was a phrase that he used that has always just hit home for me. He described this as an almost indecent display of industry. When you think about writing, blogging, producing videos, writing your next book, take that phrase to heart. When last did you indulge in an almost indecent display of industry? The more we are putting out into the universe, the greater our total presence. Experts are constant producers, or in even simpler terms, give and you will receive. It's a spiritual principle and it works. Number 6. Number 6 is understanding value. Folks, this one has been the single most difficult one for me to grapple with because I come from a family that did very low value work and always undercharged for the work and lived in kind of semi-poverty circles where money is always associated with desperation. And it's very interesting how we think about these things. My little sister last year finished high school And I was very proud of her. She took top art and top design students across her entire school. And she came out of high school with these 2 awards, and I thought, I want to be my little sister's first customer. So I said to her, Lauren, tell you what, would you put together a couple of original drawings that I can use in articles and books and perhaps even as slides for presentations? And look, I'm not going to pay you a lot for it. I'll give you 1,000 rand. And little 18-year-old Lauren's jaw dropped and her eyes went wide, and she said, we have vastly different notions of what is and what is not a lot of money. And I had a good laugh about it, and I drove home afterwards thinking about this encounter, and I thought, why does she have such a low opinion of her own value? I mean, I know she's grown up in the same household as me, and we've struggled financially, but surely she's moved on, and she's seen the world around her, and we've started to emerge from this difficult background. And it occurred to me that what was going on was this. Lauren's experience with making money was only over weekends, where she helped as a camera person's assistant at weddings. And what she would do is she would carry bags, and she would haul lights, and she would move wires, and she knew that if she did 5 hours of work at a wedding, she would take home $200. So in Lauren's brain, 5 hours of work equals 200 rand. And therefore, she thinks to herself, if I spend 5 hours working on original art, it must be worth 500 rand. It has been immensely difficult for me as a speaker to get around the idea of proper fees for an hour of work. We have to understand our own value. In fact, I go so far as to say that among the middle and lower classes, one of the ideas that keeps families in generational cycles of poverty is tying money to hours. The more we do that, and the more fixedly we do that in our minds, the more we trap ourselves in ongoing cycles of poverty. It's as though when we're born, well-meaning parents who have been in different working scenarios, generally speaking, it's work for the big corporate all your life. They will say to us, my son, my daughter, you're young and strong, pick up your wheelbarrow and fill it with bricks. If you want to make a coin, you push your wheelbarrow for an hour and you get your coin. If you want a second coin, you push your wheelbarrow for a second hour. And every hour you push your wheelbarrow, you're awarded another coin. Now we get to the point where we have the mortgages and the cars and the expenses coming out of our ears, and we realize that we don't have enough coins. So our thinking immediately goes, get a second wheelbarrow in the evenings and push it for more hours in order to get more coins. That thinking can keep us trapped in cycles of poverty. As speakers, we need to understand the idea of value. I would go so far as to say that some speakers are prospering to the extent that they are because they're expensive. I think there's a small element of truth in that. Our fee is largely perceived as a reflection of our value. Now, I don't have any firm guidelines for this one, but my basic rule of thumb is do not price yourself in the lower half of our pricing spectrum. I would say find out what the top speakers and speakers just sort of below that level are charging, and make sure that you are at least halfway up the fee scale, moving into the upper half. What happens if you start off with very low fees? The problem is not getting your customers to accept a raise in price. The problem is getting yourself around the idea that you can charge more. Again, one of the most difficult things for me was raising my fee to a realistic level, because I had been at a lower level for so long that that had become my reality. We have to price ourselves right, and that's number 6, understanding value. Number 7, this is an interesting one. We have to cut a romantic public figure. We've got to be something interesting to the world around us. Think about the Nigella Lawsons of the world. Again, not necessarily the world's most technically accomplished chef or the world's most technically accomplished cook. They are doing something else. These are men and women who are taking their personality, their brand, their voice, their face out into the world. And the first thought that people generally have is, I'm not as brash as a Jeremy Clarkson. I could never be that. Well, how about a Jamie Oliver? He's a fairly quiet personality, but he is a personality that we know because we see his face and we hear his voice all the time. He's taking his unique flavor and putting it out into the world. Not only that, but he has a cause. And a cause helps us to become a romantic figure. You see folks like Jamie Oliver all around the world attacking how people eat and how school systems are feeding their children and so on, and that cause makes the world come alive for them and makes them romantic public figures. What's interesting is sometimes we don't understand our own cause. Anyone here ever watched a show called Mary, Queen of Shops? Ever seen it? Okay. Very basic formula. A lady named Mary, who is a business consultant in the UK, in London, goes to failing businesses and turns them around. She tries to work out what's going wrong, how can we get them back to profitability. And one show jumped out at me as being just such an interesting example of how causes work and how we can miss our own cause. There was a store in London that was dying on its feet. And it happened to be the equivalent of what we in South Africa would call Donna Claire. It was a store for plus-sized ladies. And what was happening here is that the lady who ran the store had a second job as a fitness instructor at a gym. Yes, you can already see that there's a little bit of tension here. And she did not like or respect her customers. So what was happening, and they filmed this, was women were coming into the store and looking at things, and she'd talk to them like this. She'd say, yeah, you can hide the bulges if you use that over there. We can get rid of this unsightly bit around your stomach by doing the following. And she was just tearing these people apart. Now, what's fascinating about that is that there was a cause built in to what she did, but she didn't realize it. She had this perfect opportunity to be a thought leader unto London and unto the plus-size ladies of the UK if it had only occurred to her. And what an absolutely an incredible area for generating material. You could write the articles, you could do the blogs, you could do the television show, the right fashions for plus-size ladies, what to wear to this event, what to wear to that event, how to handle all of the following, but she didn't understand her built-in cause. What's yours? If you train presentation skills, do you understand what your cause really is? Do you have something that you can vilify, something you can glorify? What is your built-in cause? Because without the cause, once again, we're just teachers. Once again, we are just the professor disseminating information. We want to be more than that. We want to be iconic thought leaders, so that when people discuss our industry or our cause, they naturally tag our name to the end of the sentence, you know who you should talk to about that. You know who you should talk to about that. So, another part of being something of a romantic public figure is really just using the power of visual iconography. Now, we know that we're supposed to be as visual as we possibly can be, but we tend to think of that just in terms of the slides that we put up at events and perhaps the way in which we dress, maybe how our website looks. We can do so much more. I noticed, for example, that I started selling more books at the back of a room when I first bought a banner. Who here has a banner? Okay, quite a number of people around the room. It changes the perception of your professionalism. Suddenly, instead of a table with a couple of items lying on it, you look like a business. It just has a different perception. The banner is important. The email banner is important. The visual iconography that surrounds us becomes incredibly important. And the psychology is so basic. You know, it's like, if you think about it in terms of a village, who's the chief? He's the guy with the feathers on his head. We need some feathers. We need something that announces, here goes something special. And because we put so much emphasis today on content, we often forget about the power of sexy visuals. The banners, the photographs, things like that. Big public events are great opportunities to get moving visual photos. There's one of Laura Stack, and I think if I remember correctly, this is her banner on Facebook at the moment. The photograph is taken from the back of the stage over here. And you see Laura as the president standing, or ex-president, standing at the front of the stage from behind. And beyond her, you just see this sea of people laughing and reacting to whatever it is that she's doing. Visually spectacular. I think that is so much more powerful than listing on your website the dots and dashes of information that you cover. That's just a visual punch in the gut that says, here's someone important. Here's someone who is clearly an expert. I had a nice photo taken by accident once. I was presenting in Hong Kong, and the cameraman just had this blaze of inspiration. We had an aisle down the center of the room, and there must have been about 800 people in this auditorium. And he said, go and stand in the middle. Then he got the entire audience to just throw their hands up, and I'm standing in the middle with my hands like this. And it had never occurred to me to take a photo like that, but now it's something that I use in my marketing materials because it just looks so cool. Instead of saying, Douglas has spoken for, you have this burst of visual that says, there it is. There it is. We need to think more visually. We need to think in terms of the visual iconography that we can add to our marketing materials. Number 8, keep taking inspired action. Keep on taking inspired action. The thing that we tend to be very good at is small, consistent, daily efforts. And my belief is that if you are taking small, consistent, daily efforts, it will cause you to rise very gradually, and it will build your income very gradually. But if we want to add that extra zero to our income, we have to do those quantum leap things that take us to the next level. Those big, crazy, inspired ideas that jump out at you, as we heard yesterday, generally on the treadmill, in the shower, in the bath, while we're running. At the craziest times, those ideas can often change our lives. And sometimes it's a case of just walking through a door and trying. I mentioned in our session yesterday that I was fortunate enough to get some of my self-published books sponsored by a corporate company. That was a big, crazy idea. I walked into one of my clients as a guy in his mid-20s and said, I've got these books, would you like to give me 100,000 rand? And he said yes. And we spent the next half hour talking about his next yachting trip. It was that easy. Now, of course, the reality is out of every 10 big quantum leap things that we try, maybe 1 or 2 of them actually work out. But those 1 or 2 that work out, they can change the course of our career trajectories. They can change the course of our lives. So, I believe in a dual approach. I do think we need to be doing those small, consistent daily activities, the daily writing, the daily blogging, the daily sales calls, whatever it is for you. But I also think we need to zoom back from time to time, become extra scenario thinkers and say, what are the great, big, crazy things that we could try that add an extra zero? I had one once where I was coming back from a Toastmasters convention, and I found myself near the BBC buildings in London. And I looked at these buildings, I mean, again, young guy, sort of out of my depth and my territory, and I thought, I wonder how hard it would be to walk through the front door and get an interview. I walked through the front door and I said, hi, I'm here, and got an interview. I had emails from places like Kenya saying that they had heard it. Great big crazy ideas that just strike you like a flash of lightning. If we don't act on them, they can't change our lives. When we do, sometimes they will. So, when last did you take crazy inspired action and move yourself out to the next level? And the final and very simple idea that I'd just like to leave you with is, be flat out awesome. Be an incredible speaker. I have 2 examples of speakers that I've seen where I just sat there going, wow. Now, there have been many really, really top-notch presentations that I've seen throughout my lifetime at different industries and conventions, but 2 stand out in my mind as moments in my life. One was a past Toastmasters world champion, and he's actually coming out to South Africa this year, Mark Brown. Born in Jamaica, and just this huge charismatic personality, and it wasn't even a proper speech. We just happened to be at the hotel at this convention, and it was what they called an international songs evening. So people from different countries would just sit on the carpet, and one person would get up and sing a song from their home country, the next person would get up and tell a bit of a folk tale, whatever the case might be. Mark Brown strode into the room as this big personality, and he spoke about what Jamaica was like as a child, and he sang a song about how he and his uncle are flowing down the river and one of them falls out of the boat. I mean, that's all it was. But just the energy and the charisma was so electrifying. I can remember at one stage looking away from Mark's presentation and glancing around the audience. They were eating out of his hands. It was just the sense of being caught up in the rapture of the moment. There are so many clever marketing things that we can do, but maybe the best one is just to be flat out awesome. People talk about you. You become the sentence, the name at the end of the sentence. You become the icon you are looked up to. You become the public figure. People want to see you speak again. It's as simple as that. And the second one, and I've mentioned again, was Randy Gage. He did a 3-hour session without any slides, without any background visuals. He literally stood in front of an audience and spoke to us. Now, what did he do differently? It was the strong point of view. It was the quality of the information. But mostly, it was how he made it come alive. It was the stories, the humor, the metaphor, the frameworks, all of these things that just took our imaginations to a whole different universe. And once again, I glanced around the room and saw people eating out of the speaker's hand. 3 hours flew by, and when he said, "Thank you, I'm done," everyone went, "Ah," and wanted to stay during the lunch break. Be flat out awesome. It's the strongest thing that we can possibly do. On the one side of things, we have the dusty professor. On the other side of things, we have the rock star. We have to be a little bit of both. We have to combine the personality with the expertise and take that on a road show. The more you show your feel, your flavor, your strong and unique point of view, the greater your chances of rising to become an iconic speaker. Thanks so much for your time.